So I thought I would share a little bit about how I started drawing, and you guys are free to answer or ask questions, and or Vita will, I guess, host them, she said in the chat. But I have a short PowerPoint, and then I would do a demo. I'm going to change my webcam, and then I'm going to do a drawing here for most of the time. Does anyone have any questions from the start? I could maybe field, and then you could also just...
I have a question. What medium do you use the most in your drawings?
Yeah, I love mixed media, to be honest. I put up behind me, I have color pencil, which is with Prismacolor, which is a waxy kind of color pencil. And then I use a brand called Derwent, which is a little more refined and like very linear. And then I also have some Dutch watercolor pencils, and they can be, it can be used with a brush. And I can post those in the chat box. And then I also have a Faber-Castell thicker brand. For me, the color pencil is all about the point. You know, like sometimes I intentionally leave the color pencil to be dull, so I can get a thicker mark and kind of out of focus. So if I just can grab this for a second, what I mean is like I'll have a soft passage in my drawing at some point, and then I'll have a line, a really quick line. So I use two different tools for that kind of mark, and also like two different kind of pressures for that to happen. So what
kind of materials are we going to be using tonight?
So what I have is I have my little organization. So I have the Derwent color pencils, and I have Prismacolor color pencils, and I also have these Dutch watercolor pencils. So I have a range, and then I also have graphite. So what I like to do when I get started is organize all my little graphite in rows between the H, the really fine lines. H can go up really fine to 6H, and then 4H, 2H, and so on down. And then I have a really heavy 8B pencil, which is a rich, luscious black. So I go from really thin gray light lines to something a lot thicker and heavier. And then
quite a range. That's awesome.
Yeah, I like to have a range. And then I love the Kneaded Eraser, the Blick eraser, and I just cut a brand new one for this evening. I like to take and dedicate like part of the eraser for color pencil, another part of the eraser for graphite, and so on. So the color stays pure. And then I have a traditional, portable pencil sharpener, but I really like sharpening with an X-Acto knife, as long as it's sharp. And you can kind of see on some of these pencils, if you open up and expose some of the lead, you can get a much more painterly brush stroke. So sometimes if I draw, I'll hold the pencil like upright like this, a little more like a drawing tool, and then other times I'll use the side. So it allows for you can kind of see some smeary, larger marks if I use the side, a little more gestural. So generally I start really quick and open, and then as the drawing progresses, I'll switch to the Derwent, which is like this, and it's a lot thinner. So I like to have like 3 or 4 of one color, so I can have one that's open and one that's a little more refined. And what else am I using? And sometimes I will use really heavy, I just bought these at Artists and Craftsmen, this Stablo pencil, and it also can be a watercolor pencil. But generally I use the Derwent and the Prismacolor. And my paper, I love Canson Mixed Media. The paper is a little bit thicker, and it comes in a lot of different sizes depending on if you have a large table or if you want to be more portable. I'm going to use that tonight. And then as a backup paper, I like the Strathmore 400 series. It has a little less glue in it than the typical regular grade paper. And then I also have strips of paper that I cut just to do a color study. So I like to do a little color study every time I start a drawing, just so I'm not intimidated when I actually start the drawing. I can push as hard as I can, make a pressure drawing, and then see what the same color looks like with less pressure. For instance, like this burnt umber looks super, super dark when there's a lot of pressure and there's no white of the paper exposed. And then I like to keep it open. So I like extremes like solid and then light. And then once you can identify that value range, it's a lot easier to create a sense of believable space in your drawing. Anything else I like to use? I like a drawing board. I'll show you my drawing board in 1 second. And I think that's about it. Graphite, color pencil, paper, erasers. So let me get started. So I have a color wheel, and this color wheel, I'm going to turn it over to a PowerPoint, but I have this printout of a color wheel, and I just want to show you that one of the major things I think about when I start drawing is proportion and how much of one color exists in an object you're looking at. And the power, like every single person has a different personality, like a shadow side and a bright side. Color has that same kind of quality, and yellow is really weak, doesn't have a lot of power, but you can see how much more power blue and violet have over here. And then red and green are actually harmonious, like equal distant to each other. And then orange is kind of a bridge. This is a color theorist called Joseph Itten. This was his idea to think about when you look at colors, there's usually some sort of push and pull relationship between the two, and yellow being so weak, when we look at color for a long time, and I actually have a yellow object here I'm gonna draw here. When you look at one single color for quite a long time, let's say at least 2 minutes solid, the rods and cones in your eyes start to get saturated and no longer can register the color yellow. So there's a simultaneous contrast scientific phenomenon that takes place, and you start to see violet. You start to see the opposite on the color wheel. So if you're familiar with the color wheel, you start to register more violet. So if you look away after you look at a color and you look at a white field, you'll see a ghost image of that color. And so I think it's kind of interesting just to keep in mind some of the scientific properties of color. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen here a minute and show you a quick couple of things. Oh, let me see this image. It's gonna get bigger. So when we think of color, generally we think of local color. Say a lemon is yellow, right? Or a stop sign is red. And that's the beginning of what we think of with color. This color wheel I really like. It's an analogous color wheel, which means all three colors in an analogous wheel share the same hue. So here it's like yellow, green, yellow, and then a dull yellow, or a yellow ochre. But we usually see these nuances, but when I begin a drawing, I start with a simple general color as a ground, as like a base. The other thing, just as an aside about analogous colors, is they are generally harmonious. So like this rectangular scale on the right, all creates harmony. So if you were looking to choose a certain palette, this is an easy way to create harmony, just because they all share a common color, and then the eye starts to feel lulled into traveling across the surface of your image much more easily. Okay.
Michelle, quick question. What was the last name of the scientist who did the study on the eye and color?
Joseph Albers was he's one colorist, but I'm gonna have to get the exact. It's called simultaneous contrast. I think it's Chevelle, a French artist. I'll have to get the exact name for you though. I don't want to be incorrect. one other thing that I start to do when I get started with a drawing is take my whole color pencil set and make a study similar to what's behind me over here, and just label each color. So I have a visual, a flat visual. So when I look at my setup, I can start to visualize what color I need. And then again, you can kind of see this, I did a screenshot from online, and this is the name of the pencil, Derwent Artist Color Pencil. This artist, you know, measured a grid, and I love the fact that there's a really brilliant part on the top, a lot of pressure, and then it fades off. So the sense of touch and the way you apply the mark and also the surface, the paper, have a lot to do with what the color is in the end, what the resulting image is. Oh, here's my image. So let me just, can I make this smaller? Okay. Okay, so what I generally do is have fun. I try to have a scratch piece of paper, and I'm not going to be working with oil pencils or oil pastels right now, but I just have a lot of stuff available when I get started. And I wanted to show you a quick shot from my sketchbook. When I go outside, I like to bring a sketchbook with me, and then if I get inspired, I'll start to draw something. And very often I'll start with graphite. So this is, I go to the Wissahickon a lot and draw there, and this is a quick snapshot of the woods. And I just wanted to show you how the light, simple camouflage shape starts, say on that olive green, and I start to subdivide certain areas and press a little bit harder. So the general idea here is large shape first and then smaller, and set that smaller space like a jewel in a ring setting, set that smaller value change inside of a bigger shape. And I generally start with contour line, this single line here, and it's really definitive, and I don't usually erase it unless of course I don't like it, but I usually try to use the line as a boundary and then have the larger, softer shapes shift in that area. And here's just two close-ups on my drawing. One is using, this is the Prismacolor. You can kind of see it's waxier, the pink. And I start out with generally like this light pressure with the white of the paper coming through. And then this is the Derwent pencil where I was drawing water, and it has an embossed quality. So the pencil lead is really crisp, and I press harder when I see a dark, and I lighten up when I see a light. Okay, so here's the color wheel. So I was talking about yellow, and when you see yellow, I always want to remember that there's a ghost of every single color across here. Let's see, so that's a 24 color wheel, and the most important or easiest way to see color is actually if you have a middle gray ground. So this middle gray ground allows you to see color at the most brilliant. So when you look at a white surface, it creates almost a silhouette effect. And when you look at a black surface, if you've ever drawn on black paper, it's really fabulous way to see color kick up, like become super saturated. So the ground and the environment have a lot to do with how you see color as well. One thing I do is not really mix white into my pencil because it's very chalky, and it's mostly a time factor. So if I look at what I'm drawing, or look at what I'm drawing, I try to identify those light places, and I try to identify those dark, duller places first, and figure out where the highly saturated area is first. Okay, so I'm going to skip over this. So this chart. So one way, if you start to think about color, is you think about temperature. So in the background, this red is warmer, is a little more fire to it. And then if you can see this cylinder, this has a little bit more blue in it. And those are two things I start thinking about when I get started, is where is the cooler zone and where is the warmer zone, and what is the most brilliant. And the white here really dulls that down. And that helps me identify that the direction of light is coming from the right side. over here. So it's all different degrees of intensity. And this zone on the bottom right is very low in intensity and is really muddy. There's lots of different colors that are set in there, and more brilliant pure colors. Those are the third thing you want to identify: your light, your dark, and then where the pure area is. And that is right up there. So these are paintings. Okay. Then the other thing I think of when I get started, and I'll get started drawing in a couple seconds here, is trying to bulk down something to its most essential shape. So even though I see this shoe, you know, in the 6th step of resolution, I try to create a geometric contour that is very simple and only pays attention to really important directional changes. So on this horizontal line on the top part of the shoe, even though it's an arc here, a half moon shape or a half circular shape, what that line is doing is it's a bridge between this juncture and this juncture. Where does the shape you're looking at, where does the form you're looking at change direction? So that's a key point, just so that I don't get overwhelmed with all the surface information. So when I look at the shoe, I can see the eyelets and the wrinkles and the texture and whatnot. But in the beginning, it's because the color pencil drawing takes a lot of patience and locking in shapes slowly, I try to find the simple shape and actually kind of like a furniture maker would sand something down or a sculptor would chisel something down. I actually try to use the negative shape here and slowly add information as the drawing goes. So let's see. So I just thought I'd show a couple images. What I think about when I look at the form is I box in the form, and that helps me see that negative, so I can start to see the direction and the lilt and the curve of the object I'm looking at. And the other thing it does is helps me see geometry. So even though I'm going to show an organic, I got a great hyacinth, a nice violet hyacinth. It's really organic. I'm going to try to look for the geometry in it first, like where is a square or where is a rectangle. So if you look here, there's a triangle kind of attached to a rectangle here. So sometimes it's what's around the object, and that informs the way you draw the object as much as the object itself here. The next thing I look for is pressure. So things that are closer, I'm going to increase my pressure, and things that are farther away, I'm going to keep really lightly here. I don't know if you can see it here, but there's a light grid, a vertical, and then a horizontal and a slight diagonal over here. That is constructed with like a 2H pencil, and just lightly putting in the basic shapes of the form. And so when I draw, this is a contour line here. I create a continuous contour that travels across the whole form. So I try to kind of look at the whole entire form before I get caught up with detail. And I press a little bit harder where there's a shadow. So on the side of the leg there's a little bit more shadow. But I also try to put like that geometry happening down here. So I can see from the top of the knee, I just pull a line up to get the top of the, to figure out where the top of the head is in this figure drawing over here. And then just one other thought about how you can create a curve. So trying to figure out the curve of the muscle on the top of the arm, I first would put this triangle shape, and then I would fit in the curve inside of it, kind of find that shape. Okay, so I think that is about it. Oh, the other thing I do figure out before I make a drawing is I do a couple thumbnails, very small. Sometimes they can be 3 by 5 inches. Sometimes they can be 5 by 7, and try to figure out, you know, do I like these objects? What's interesting about them to me? And where is the quality of light? Where is the passage of light happening? So I make a little snapshot. I have a teapot. So instead of drawing all of the shadows, I can make a really simple maquette or croquis and show the shape and how the light is falling towards the right over here. Okay, so we're gonna get started.
Michelle, quick question before
Yeah.
we go on.
Yeah.
When you're drawing in monochromatic, do you think of darker areas and or shadows in terms of the color wheel and use a bit of the opposite color for darker areas? Or do you just use more black and white for brighter areas?
Yeah, that's such a good question, Vita, because here's the shot I have. This is like a greenish gray picture, and it's a metallic form. And what I do is actually use the complement instead of black. Initially, I can use black really lightly with graphite, but I will block in the complement yellow and violet, and then there's some blue in there as well, which is constructed of violet with red, so that it's going to increase the vibrancy and increase the volume of the object. So it's from a distance, you're going to read the local color of this object as gray, but as the audience or the viewer comes closer to the image, it's going to become more apparent that it's actually an impression, right? The impressionists used swatches of color, or Seurat used multiple mosaic-like fractions of color. So that's why I have all this stuff all around me, so that if I see a color, I can respond and then import it or draw it, you know, immediately. And then your eraser is a really good component of it. It's an additive and subtractive process as well. Yeah, that's a great question. So here you can see there's also, instead of locking in a really substantial part where the shadow takes place on this other idea of lightly cross-hatching is another technique that I work with. And I often move my hand in the direction of the form. So this cylindrical form, I will move in that cylindrical form first, and then touch down on the object or the drawing, and then lift up the hand. So I do have, here's some, so I took this because this is a cross contour shot. So there's that sense of structure that's in that candle shape. But I do have another drawing right in here that shows you, here we go, that shows you that that sense of volume. So when I think of looking at a bottle or a cylinder, even though it's moving vertically up and down, I make a full ellipse, like the front and the back, and try to draw an X-ray. And then where I see more shadow, I press harder. So it's all about pressure. And I always start really lightly. So in the middle, I can kind of use my eraser, or I use the color of the paper for that to happen. So does that answer your question, Vita? I know I went a little.
That was Rosa's question. So
Good question, Rose. Thank you. I wanted to, yeah, you guys are welcome to jump in there. Then the last idea about constructing the form is thinking about, this is a half of a green pepper, is first thinking about something with geometry and that simple boxing in the form, and then thinking about with organic. And I essentially take both those ways of seeing and put them together in the drawing. I wanted to jump here as the end for my PowerPoint and just think about, if you guys wanted to just rest your eyes at that color, this square down here might be identified like a rose color or a dull red. This is one like two. This is a Joseph Itten color exercise, and it's using Color Aid, which is painted paper, and designers used it quite a bit before there were computers. But the reason is because paint will absorb light, and the pixels on your computer is actually projecting light. So light is acting in a totally different way here. But I just wanted to show you that the same color, this is the key, the color key at the bottom, the same color doesn't look different to you. Does it appear as if it's bluer on the orange and perhaps a different way on the blue? If you just want to, if you want to just take your gaze and look at the tall rectangle on the orange, and then shift your gaze and look at the tall rectangle on the blue, and probably it will take 2 or 3 times for that to happen. I'm just wondering if you see a cooler side on this side, if you start to see blue. And maybe you start to see orange. You would probably start to see the same yellow-orange happen over here, like maybe there's a little glow that happens there. You can type in 1 like 2. I'll put that in the chat when I'm done with my PowerPoint. But that's the other idea about trying to change the identity of a color. Okay, so there's that. So let me switch. Let me see if I can get this right. I'm going to switch my webcam so you can see my desk here. And get this lined up. Oh, let me show you my still life for a second. So I'm just going to share my screen one more time here. And so this is what I've got to draw. And what I've got is a complementary color system here. So I've got yellow and violet and some blue. There's some blue in the shadows in the hydrangea. And I put it on a bright pink ground, and it's on this wood grain table. And I want to see if you can see some blue in this shadow on the left of that yellow candle. And then perhaps some orange that's in the shadow over there. It's because light is basically bouncing around. You know, it's being refracted and bouncing around a lot. And hopefully the yellow is going to look more yellow because it's in front of this duller green in the back, and this violet is going to look more violet. Probably because the scale, that's the other thing, like the issue of size is going to happen. And then what happens when you look at the complements, and which I'm going to start to do is mix orange and, yellow and violet, and I'm going to get a brown or like a neutral kind of color. So that's going to be, and they actually look pretty dark in the camera here. That's going to be something that I'm going to concentrate on when I make this drawing, is mixing. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of that. And so you guys can all pin my video, right? So you can, it can make it a little larger for you. I'm going to grab my graphite. So I'm going to start with a 4H pencil. And I have these color charts. And I'm going to have a 4H pencil, and I'm going to have a 8B pencil. And I can have like a basic middle of the road, like 2B pencil, like your typical pencil. So I'm going to have a dark, a gray, get this right, a dark, a gray, and a light. And what, okay, sometimes it just went out of focus, didn't it? Let me get this better. How's that? Okay. All right, so what I first do when I look at my setup is I take all the colors that I see and pull them out, and I'm gonna make a scale just like this. So I'm just gonna identify the colors, and if I can't, like the hydrangeas in there, they were a variety, so I'm gonna pull an ultramarine blue, a cobalt blue, a cerulean blue. I'm gonna have those available to me, and I have some lighter blues. This one is what the pencil looks like when I take my X-Acto knife and I kind of open it up. And I had some yellow. All right, so what I'm gonna do, and I had some pink. So in the shadows, I'm gonna try to go past local color, and I'm gonna start to mix the colors. And I actually like to see these fairly organized when I get started. And possibly I have white and, all right, and then I have some browns over here. So that's my palette. So I pull my palette out and then I keep my colors that are around close by for some accent colors. So what I'm going to start to do is work with my a light touch like this. And I'm going to keep most of my drawing like at this level. And I'm going to start with a 2H pencil and start drawing. So let me just slide these over here a second and get this pencils. All right. All right. So I did want to show you. So what I do with each color, get this, so you guys can see this, is I'll take and just kind of make a swatches, and that sometimes that'll make it really light. And if you want to keep this around for a while, you can label each color and label each brand. Okay, so this is generally. So what I do is I literally will take my swatches and I'll, what I'm gonna do is like superimpose it in front of what I'm looking at so I can see it. Can you see that ultramarine blue there? So that's why I want to see it like a large swatch, because if I try to do that with my color pencil, you can barely see this. This is too small, right? And the other thing that happens, like this gets a little out of focus, is the white of the paper helps balance the color around a little bit. Oops, that's taking a little bit of time to focus. There we go. So I call this cross hatching when I make the side to side mark. And the other thing that I like to do is I'll make a concentric circle. So I'll have a mark that kind of like your washing machine is just going to be creating a loop. And since I'm looking at things that are organic, I'm going to keep my hand in that motion. So I would continue my color chart, and I'm going to get started with my composition a little bit here. And what I'm going to do is grab my lightest mark so I can make that change really easily. I'm going to take my H pencil, just get started. And I might take away, just keep this. And so the other thing I'm going to look at is I've got a lemon and a, let's get that a little, that focus. No, there we go. Ah, I saw that snap. I've got a brilliant cad yellow and I've got a dull, and those are the two colors I'm going to look for also. In each object, I'm going to try to identify the shadow, and you can kind of see possibly a little violet here or a little bit of blue in the area where that shadow is. And I'm going to try to find something that relates the yellows, the bright yellow and the dull yellow, and it's probably going to be a violet. And it's also going to be some orange. So I'm going to try to find in every object, I'm going to try to think of them as a group, and I'm going to draw them a little more generally. So there we go. So if I have my drawing, so I start kind of loosely, and I could put in a contour a little bit. Okay. So I have a green shape here, and so I'm gonna block in some color, and I might. I'm gonna put this object over here so you can see. So when I make this shape, here's my geometric version of it. I'm gonna start to break it apart. There's this. So what I'm gonna do for, I've got The other thing I have is this object. So I have my duller yellow ochre, and I have my fluorescent yellow ochre, and I have my mediums. So I have a gray, a light, and a dark. And I'm going to start to block in the shadow, and I'm also going to grab some violet for some of the shadow in here. What I'm going to do is now I call this technique mass scribble. So I start really loosely, and then I start to use an eraser because remember, I want to keep the white of the paper showing, and I'm going to try to create a more opaque or more saturated area in the places that are darkest. But I don't want to allow it to build up too waxy, and then I can't make any changes. So I'm going to try, that's probably going to make a green, which I don't want. Here's my violet. So I'm going to make a dark with my graphite for a little bit. There's a shadow here. And so what I'm going to do is what I can do is put some graphite down, and then I can put the color in between the graphite, and then that optically mixes, or I could make the graphite very dark, and I can get it very, very dark, and then I could literally start to lay the violet on top of it. So in a way, it's light painting because or transparency of the stained glass, because you're mixing the color on the surface of the paper. The other thing I could do is, if I'm going to make, I'll go back to my drawing, is I could start to make, I could change the direction of my mark. So I go side to side over here, and now I'm going to go horizontally, and I'm going to start to describe the petals in this lotus flower. And I'm going to jump around a little bit and start to subdivide the shape of each petal. And I'm going to keep it super, super general. And I'm going to block in some of the shadow first. So I'm going to make the whole drawing very general, and then start to focus the whole drawing together. So I'm a big fan of placing all the color. So since it's sitting on this pink, this really pink fluorescent, it's got this on it. So I'm going to lay that ground down now. And again, I'm going to keep my, is it still in focus there? Okay. I'm going to keep my my touch really light. Okay. Like this. And I'm going to do some transparency right there. You put a little more violet on there. I'm going to grab my ultramarine blue and my cerulean blue, and I'm going to start to refine this edge and make this. You could either make an outside line like this if I wanted to, start to describe each petal. That's one option. The other option, using negative space, is I can start to describe the soft shadow edges and start to pull up the shadow up around it here. Go like this. And I've got some pink. I'm going to let some of the pink on the back define it. Around, and I have a little bit of the wood grain of the table back there that I run into, so I'm going to switch colors, and I'm going to really want to get rid of the white of the paper because this is pretty blue. I know it doesn't seem blue at all, but I mean the color of the paper has a blue tint to it. and it's very cool. So what I'm looking at is really warm. So the sooner I put down more material, the more I'm going to start to get my eye to see what I'm looking at in the still life here. And then I'm going to keep this really soft. So it is going to look like an out of focus camera for about 3/4 of its life until I decide that I've covered all the white of the paper. And that's what I'm going to do here. And I'll show you a finished version of this just so you'll have a sense of what this looks like. But the process is one in which you kind of jump back and forth between the cool color, that's the shadow, and I'm going to put a little bit of yellow in there because this one's a little yellower. And it starts to mix a bit. And I see a little bit of red. I'm going to grab, see what that color, yeah, that color is actually a little more brown than I want. So go on the hunt for this. I'm going to take this, put this up here. And I have a little bit of blue in the shadow. All right, so now I'm about ready to commit, and I'm going to make this blue much, much darker. I'm going to grab my ultramarine blue here. Another thing I like to do is make a mark for every color I've used so I can find that palette at a future date. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a bit softer. And what I can do is I'm going to come back on top and draw this with a line and define all these petals in here. So I've got a shadow. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw kind of on top. So here's the wick. I'm going to start to draw on top. And in the back side, so on the area that's further away, if I look at this thing in half, the area that's further away, I'm going to use a duller color like this cerulean blue. And the area that's closer to me, I'm going to use a more brilliant one. The same kind of thing like in the front, I'm going to use that more fluorescent or like this orange. And in the back, I'm going to use something that's kind of duller like that. So I tend to divide the object in half. So what I'm going to do is use a little bit of cross hatching here, and I'm going to go back to I'm going to put the color down first, and then I'm going to place a little bit of that cross contour line here. And I'm going to gray this out. Over here, so I'll go back to my line in the back. This, and I have a little bit of a tabletop like this.
So is that the contour you're drawing with like a blue, a kind of, which color are you using?
Yeah, so this is a blue, a cerulean blue. It has a little bit of white and gray in it. So that's a contour that I'm going to draw and use a little bit of cross hatching. So I'm mixing the gray with the yellow ochre. So these two colors here I'm mixing. So what I'll do is I'll put some of the blue down kind of quickly and gesturally, and then I'll put a little more yellow down back and forth to get this sense of a little crevice here. And then since there's yellow and violet, I'm gonna jump in there with some of this. This is kind of a cool magenta, and the violet, this one is a tint of violet, and it has a little bit, a little more white in there. So I can, in the duller areas further away, I can put the violets, and then as these are these little lotus petals come around to the front, they're going to increase in brilliance and vibrancy. So I mean, that's where I'm going to reach for, and I'm going to start to mix and use a contour line, make a line like this. The other thing I can do to make, if I'm not happy with something, I can actually use an X-Acto knife, and I'm going to take away this little line, because it's pretty waxy when it gets wet, built up. And if I change direction, I was going right to left, and I take that off. I can just take that off, and I can use my brush and get rid of all that. And then I can go back on top, and it's gone. All right, so let's see. I'm gonna go back to my contour here in the front. I just wanted to locate what was happening in the back plane. And then I'm going to alternate between brown and blue and kind of yellow ochre. Get this here. Let's see. Okay. So super dark, what I'm going to do is put some shadows down and change the direction of my shadows. Okay. I'm going to bring in a little more yellow, and I'm going to bring in some, what color is this here? Some burnt sienna on the front. Do some cross hatching. And let's see. So what I'm going to do is start to mix the pink and the blue for the shadow that's on there. A little bit of red. Okay, should I show you a drawing where the whole thing is constructed? Let me switch over. Okay.
Yeah, that would be great. And we're coming up on the end here. It's 7:24, so we got a couple more minutes. But I wanted to ask, you kind of seem to be using color pencils in a painterly way in many ways.
Yeah, that is, so I have two, so here's a little more finished version of it. So I have two kind of approaches. This was a demo from of an apple. Yeah, in a more painterly way, and then I start breaking apart some of the smaller shapes inside of there. Another demonstration I did of this pitcher, or this coffee mug. I stayed away from this for tonight because it's mostly neutrals, but it's easy to see the value. It's dark and it's light. But you can kind of see some of the shadow, the construction of the shadow being violet because it's on the warm side, and the opposite of that is the violet. But what I tend to do is generally, like, painters will use a blue, like a blue and a brown. So I was trained as a landscape painter in Washington, D.C. So I would begin a painting, and I was trained to put down the color everywhere first and just see the value. And the two values that you see when you're looking at something are cool. Like, one thing is cool, which is the blue. And then another thing is warm, which would be like a burnt sienna. So if you have those two areas. So on this one, it's a little bit more linear. Like, there's a contour line that starts to capture some of the edges, but I do tend to keep the whole thing really soft. Like, here's a little more finished drawing on this one. I keep, this is floral, like a botanical study. So I go back and forth between drawing with a single contour. So right over here is just a single contour of the leaf. And then I'll put the shadow in with a really soft line, which is right over here. So that's where I'm taking the color pencil thing. And I don't want to put a contour down until the end, actually, because it's such a large contrast. So I try to put the contour on top, like the icing on the cake, so to speak. So yeah, the contour and the mass, those are two things. So like this botanical study kind of shows those two different ways of working. Then another thing that I try to do when I create, so here's kind of like the beginning of this in this mug, is just like identify the back part is in value, find that darkest area first, and just begin a study. Like, I always do a study before I do the full drawing, and just have one color that's the warm and one color that's the dark, and start as light as possible, and then I start adding the color. So for me, it is like mixing. But if that was a lot to take in, all those different colors that when I was drawing this lotus, there's a lot happening spatially. This one, like, the planes are a little easier to identify. There's a cavity that's farther away, and then there's a plane that's in the front, and then it's you know, an infinity loop, so it kind of travels into itself. But to come back to color theory, basically, if you can break anything you're looking at into the brilliant area, like what's the purest pigment on the cool side and what's the purest pigment on the warm side, all the half steps or all the middle tones are what I was trying to mix with the color pencil before. But to begin with, it is really helpful to start with just your high and your low. What's the brightest and what's the coolest on those kind of drawings. And then, like, in the back, when I make the this was the tabletop, and here's the tabletop, and this was the shadow behind it. It's actually like stacking many lines. So that's kind of one approach compared to using this. And this is what sandpaper will do if you use sandpaper on your piece. So yeah, it's kind of an intuitive process. With the color pencil, if you get to a place where the color is really saturated, it's pretty much it, unless if you want to cut another piece of paper and chinkolay it on top of there to cover it up. But it's basically what it's for.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Michelle. That was so great. Any questions before we say goodnight? Are there any other questions at all?
All right. I am so.
You were so thorough. That was fantastic. Thank you, Michelle. That's so great.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm happy to. Oops, what is that? I don't know. Oh, I'm happy to have a chance to show you, and I'm happy to be teaching this class in the fall. So if you guys want to email me or message me. My website is up, and I can put my Instagram in the chat box. If you guys want to ask me any questions, I'm happy to do that. So I hope you guys try some color pencil. Just grab a couple and experiment. And that's the best way to learn. That's all I can say.
Awesome. Yeah. So as Michelle is saying, she will be teaching a drawing and color class again in the fall. Registration for the fall is going to open on July 20th. Michelle's teaching one this summer as well. Her Instagram and website and email are in the chat. So if you want to connect with her, do copy that and paste it, because the chat will not be available after we leave the meeting. Other than that, thank you again, Michelle. That was so wonderful. Thank you for having us. And thank you everybody for joining us tonight. Please do join us next week. We got a bunch of interesting things coming up. They're on our calendar page. We'd love to see you again. Otherwise, have a great holiday weekend, and stay safe. Enjoy. Good night, everybody.
Good night.